The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a warm, golden glow, but for me, a sudden chill had descended. My name is Clara, and at 62, I believed I had perfected the art of orchestrating flawless evenings. Tonight was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, and the crowning achievement of Arthur's, the catering and event company I had poured my soul into for 2 decades. From my discreet vantage point behind a floral column, I watched the culmination of months of my planning. The city's elite mingling, champagne flutes clinking, and the murmur of impressed conversation. But then I heard it. It was Arthur's voice, my protégé, the man I'd handpicked to be the face of my company. He was speaking to the mayor's wife and a prominent banking tycoon. Clara is a legend, of course, Arthur said, his tone a perfect blend of feigned reverence and concern. But between us, she's been losing it lately. A few too many dropped details, a bit of forgetfulness. I'm having to double and triple check everything. It's a lot to manage, but I'm doing my best to protect her legacy. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Losing it? Who could recall the dietary restrictions of a client from 5 years ago? Whose entire life was a testament to meticulous detail. He was painting me as a doddering old woman, a liability to the very company I had secretly founded. The color drained from my face as I watched them nod with sympathetic, pitying expressions. In that single cruel moment, Arthur wasn't just firing me, he was erasing me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony was as bitter as the espresso I'd personally sourced for the dessert course. Just last month, we'd catered the launch of a new luxury car brand. The CEO, a notoriously difficult German industrialist, had demanded a menu that was both sustainable and avant-garde, with a logistical timeline that bordered on the impossible. Arthur had panicked. He'd come to my design studio, wringing his hands, convinced we had to turn it down. I, however, saw the puzzle and the potential. For 3 sleepless nights, I worked, designing a zero-waste menu featuring dishes that looked like miniature works of art. From beet-cured salmon on rye crisps that resembled rose petals, to a deconstructed forest floor made of chocolate, moss-like pistachio sponge, and mushroom meringues. I orchestrated a team of chefs and servers with military precision, choreographing their movements to sync with the car's dramatic reveal. The event was a triumph. The German CEO, a man not known for praise, had personally sought me out, not Arthur, to declare it the most innovative and flawlessly executed event he had ever attended. Arthur, of course, had been front and center for the press photos, accepting the accolades with a gracious, practiced smile, never once mentioning my name. I hadn't minded. I preferred the quiet satisfaction of the kitchen, the thrill of creation, to the glare of the spotlight. I had built this company, Arthur's, from a small kitchen in my home, baking cakes for friends. My passion for combining flavors, textures, and aesthetics was the bedrock of our success. When the business grew too large for one person to manage both the creative and the public-facing aspects, I found Arthur. He was a charming, ambitious young man working as a maître d' at a high-end restaurant. He had no culinary skill, but he had a knack for schmoozing, for making people feel important. He was the perfect frontman. I made him a partner, gave him a generous salary, and put his name on the door. It was my idea. It would make him feel invested, I thought. I would be the heart and soul, the silent engine, and he would be the polished exterior. For 15 years, it worked. I was the architect of every menu, the designer of every tablescape, the strategist behind every event. He was the one who shook the hands, posed for the cameras, and took the credit. Now, standing behind that column, I realized my preference for the shadows had given him the darkness he needed to cultivate his betrayal. He wasn't just taking the credit anymore, he was actively, maliciously writing me out of the story altogether, casting me as the failing mind he had to compensate for. The guests were now moving toward the dessert buffet, a symphony of sweets I had spent a month designing. I saw Arthur gesturing toward it, a proud host showing off his masterpiece. My masterpiece. And as he smiled his charming false smile, I knew this was more than just a firing. It was a heist of my life's work, and he was trying to convince the world I was too senile to even notice. The last of the limousines purred away from the curb, leaving the Grand Hotel in a state of quiet denouement. The ballroom, once a sea of glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, was now the domain of my team, who moved with practiced efficiency, clearing tables and packing away the remnants of the evening's magic. I waited until Arthur had finished his final sycophantic goodbyes, his face flushed with champagne and success. I found him in the now empty reception hall, overseeing the breakdown. "Arthur," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "We need to talk." He turned, his smile still fixed in place. "Clara, a triumph, wasn't it? The mayor's wife couldn't stop raving about the passion fruit soufflés. Your touch is still golden." The casual praise, so soon after his venomous gossip, was nauseating. "I overheard you, Arthur, speaking with the Hamiltons, about me, losing it." The smile didn't just falter, it vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a mask of practiced concern. "Clara, you must have misheard. I was simply explaining how much pressure you've been under. I was defending you, expressing my admiration for how you're coping." "Coping? Coping with what? The resounding success of every event we've managed this year?" My voice was rising, drawing the attention of a few nearby staff members who quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. "You told them I was forgetful, that you had to protect my legacy. You were pitying me to make yourself look indispensable." He took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "All right, Clara, let's be honest with each other. You're not as sharp as you used to be. It's okay, it happens to everyone. Remember the Peterson wedding last month? You forgot they wanted lilies, not roses. I had to scramble to fix it." My blood ran cold. It was a lie, a masterfully crafted one. The Peterson bride had been allergic to lilies. I had the email chain to prove it, her frantic last-minute change of heart that I had accommodated without issue. He was twisting my competence into a sign of my decline. "That is an absolute fabrication, Arthur, and you know it." "Is it?" he countered, his eyes hard. "Or is your memory of the event a little fuzzy? See, this is what I'm talking about. The board has been noticing it for months. They're worried. I've been shielding you, Clara, but I can't do it anymore." "The board?" I scoffed. "You mean the 3 associates from your old investment firm that you convinced me to bring on last year? Your yes-men?" He saw he was losing the argument, so he changed tactics. He drew himself up, his face shifting from feigned concern to cold authority. "This isn't working, Clara. Your condition is becoming a liability. The company needs to move forward with a clear, decisive vision. It can't be shackled to the past." "I am not the past of this company, Arthur. I am its foundation, its present, and its future." "No," he said, the word landing like a guillotine. "You're not. As of this moment, your employment with Arthur's is terminated." He said the name of the company, my company, with a possessive emphasis that made my stomach churn. "The board held a vote this afternoon. It was unanimous. We've decided to buy out your shares at their original value. It's a generous offer, considering." I stared at him, speechless. He had planned this. The gossip, the confrontation, the firing. It was all a premeditated coup. "Your access to the company servers and email has already been revoked," he continued, as if reading from a script. "Your personal belongings from the studio will be boxed up and sent to your home tomorrow. It's better this way, Clara. For you and for the company. You need to rest. Enjoy your retirement." He tried to place a hand on my shoulder in a grotesque gesture of sympathy, but I flinched back as if from a hot iron. He was not just firing me from my job, he was exiling me from my life, from the very identity I had spent a lifetime building. He was telling me I was old, I was finished, I was irrelevant. And he was doing it with a smile. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I walked out of that ballroom in a daze. The cool night air felt alien on my skin. I had built an empire of exquisite taste and flawless execution, and I had just been dismantled by a man whose only real talent was for deceit. I got into a taxi, my mind a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. By the time I arrived at my quiet, empty house, the numbness was beginning to recede, replaced by a white-hot rage. My phone, which usually buzzed with a constant stream of messages from suppliers, clients, and staff, was silent. I tried to log into my work email on my laptop. Access denied. I tried the shared server where I kept all my recipes, design templates, and client histories, terabytes of my life's work. Access denied. He had been brutally efficient. He had cut me out completely, leaving me with nothing but the name of the company. A name I had foolishly gifted him, now a monument to my own misplaced trust. I sank into a chair in my study, the room where so many of my brilliant ideas had been born, and felt a profound sense of loss. It wasn't about the money. It was about the art, the craft, the people. It was about the joy of seeing a client's face light up at the first taste of a perfectly balanced dish. Arthur had taken all of that. He had stolen my past and foreclosed on my future, leaving me alone in the silence with his final, cutting verdict ringing in my ears. That I was old, that I was losing it, and that my time was over. He was wrong. My time was just beginning. Stast. For 2 days I existed in a fog of despair. The boxes from my studio arrived, as promised, delivered by a cold, unfamiliar courier. They were packed with a careless haste that felt like another small act of disrespect. My favorite chef's knife was chipped, a sketchbook of menu ideas was water-stained, and a framed photo of my original team taken 10 years ago was cracked. It felt like Arthur was not just disposing of my things but actively desecrating my memories. The silence from the outside world was deafening. No calls from my staff, who were likely terrified for their own jobs. No messages from clients, who had probably been fed a carefully crafted story of my graceful retirement. Arthur had isolated me perfectly. On the third morning, something shifted. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over, burning away the grief. I would not let that mediocre, charming fraud dismantle my legacy. I would not be the crazy old woman he was painting me to be. I went to my study, to the old fireproof safe hidden behind a false bookshelf. Inside, beneath dusty photo albums and my late husband's war medals, was a leather-bound portfolio. My fingers, trembling slightly, worked the combination lock. Inside was the document I hadn't looked at in 15 years. The original, unabridged, and legally binding incorporation agreement for the company. I had founded it as CA Provisions LLC. My initials, Clara Ann. The agreement stipulated in no uncertain terms that I was the 90% majority shareholder. Arthur's partnership gave him 10% equity and the title of managing partner, with operational control subject to my oversight. His name, Arthur's, was merely a doing business as, DBA name, a brand identity I had authorized. I had structured it this way on the advice of my lawyer, a shrewd old man who had warned me, "Trust is a beautiful sentiment, Clara, but a terrible business strategy. Always keep the keys to your own kingdom." I had never thought I would need them. I had given Arthur so much autonomy that he had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget, that he was a guest in my house, not its master. He hadn't bought me out. He had simply locked me out of the front door. He didn't realize I still owned the entire building and the land it stood on. Just as a sliver of hope began to dawn, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it. "Clara, dear, it's Evelyn Davenport." My breath caught. Evelyn Davenport was not just a client. She was the doyenne of the city's old money society, a philanthropist whose opinion could make or break careers. She had been at the table next to the mayor's wife at the gala. "Mrs. Davenport," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "How lovely to hear from you." "Cut the formalities, Clara. "I'm calling because I'm furious," she said, her voice crisp and commanding. "I heard what that weasel Arthur was saying about you, and then I received an email this morning announcing your immediate retirement to focus on your health. It smelled like absolute rubbish, and I wanted to hear the truth from you directly." Her directness was like a splash of cold, bracing water. For the first time in days, I wasn't being treated as fragile or senile. I was being treated as a peer. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I told her everything. The truth about the company's founding, my silent partnership, Arthur's calculated betrayal, and his gaslighting lies. I told her about the locked servers and the chipped knife. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Evelyn Davenport said, "That man is a parasite, and we are going to squash him." I don't know how, I admitted, the fight in me momentarily faltering. "He's convinced everyone I'm past my prime. He controls the narrative." "Oh, Clara," she chuckled, a sound like diamonds clinking together. "Narratives are for novels. In our world, power is what matters. And you, my dear, have more power than you think. You own the company. But we won't just fight him legally. That's slow and messy. We're going to fight him with what he values most: reputation and access." An idea began to form in my mind, sparked by Evelyn's steel resolve. "What are you thinking? Arthur has spent years cultivating an image, a brand built on your talent," she explained. "He's positioned himself as the gatekeeper to the most exclusive experiences in this city. We're going to show everyone that he's not the gatekeeper. He's just the doorman. And you, Clara, are the one who owns the entire estate." Her plan was audacious and brilliant. The annual museum ball, the only event more prestigious than the hospital gala, was in 2 months. Arthur's company was, of course, the caterer. "He will be expecting a lawsuit, Clara," Evelyn said. "He won't be expecting a public humiliation. He's built his career in the spotlight. Well, we're about to turn that spotlight into an interrogator's lamp." With Evelyn Davenport as my first formidable ally, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't realized I was missing. She saw me not as a victim, but as a queen who had been temporarily deposed. She wasn't offering me sympathy. She was offering me a war plan. Arthur thought he had fired me. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman who had nothing left to lose, and who, thanks to him, was finally realizing the immense power she had held all along. The keys to the kingdom were back in my hand, and I was about to change all the locks. The first phone call I made after speaking with Evelyn was to my lawyer, Samuel Pike. He was the same shrewd, silver-haired gentleman who had structured the company's incorporation all those years ago. He listened patiently on the other end of the line as I recounted the entire sordid affair, from Arthur's whispered lies at the gala to his grand pronouncement of my termination. When I finished, the only sound was the rustling of papers, as he, I imagined, pulled my file. "He did what?" Samuel finally said, his voice, usually so measured, crackling with a rare indignation. "Clara, he can't terminate you. He's the managing partner, not the monarch. The board he created is advisory at best, and their vote is as legally binding as a monopoly house rule. You are, and have always been, the supermajority shareholder. He has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his own employment. He revoked my access, Samuel, to everything, the servers, the bank accounts. An illegal overreach of his authority," Samuel cut in, the legal gears in his mind clearly turning at high speed. "A flagrant breach of his fiduciary duty to you and to the company. This isn't just a breach of contract, Clara. This is corporate malfeasance. We can have him removed by a court order within a week." "No," I said, a newfound clarity hardening my voice. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. "A lawsuit would be messy, public in a way that would allow Arthur to play the victim. It would be a battle of attrition. We're not going to fight him in a courtroom, not yet. We're going to fight him in the ballroom. I need you to draw up the paperwork, Samuel. Everything I need to reassert my control, quietly. Notices to the bank, resolutions to dissolve his sham board, cease and desist letters for his use of my proprietary recipes. But I don't want to file anything just yet. I want them ready. I want an arsenal." Samuel was silent for a moment, and I could practically hear him smiling. An arsenal it is. He thought he was firing an employee. He's about to discover he declared war on the state. Hanging up, I felt the first true sense of power returning. It wasn't the thrill of creation, but the cold, satisfying click of a well-oiled machine being prepared for battle. My next calls were more difficult. I reached out to my former head chef, a brilliant, temperamental artist named Julian, and my lead event manager Maria, whose logistical genius was the unsung hero of every flawless evening. I knew Arthur would have threatened them, and I didn't know if their loyalty would outweigh their fear. I reached Maria first. Her voice was hushed, nervous. "Clara, I can't talk long. Arthur, he's been watching everyone. We were told you retired for health reasons. We were told not to contact you." "Maria," I said softly, "he lied. He fired me. And he's planning to run the company into the ground with his arrogance. I am asking you, as your friend and your mentor, to trust me. I am fighting back, but I need to know what's happening on the inside." She hesitated, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "Julian is furious," she whispered. "Arthur tried to change the recipe for your signature lemon tart. Said it needed to be, quote, more modern." Julian almost walked out. "Blake, that new consultant he brought in, is a nightmare. He knows nothing about food, nothing about service. He just walks around with a clipboard, cutting costs and alienating the suppliers you spent years building relationships with. Morale is at rock bottom. We all miss you, Clara." "It's not the same." That was all I needed to hear. "Stay strong, Maria. Document everything. Every change, every complaint, every corner they cut. A storm is coming, and I don't want you to get caught in it. Just be my eyes and ears. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "Yes, I can." My conversation with Julian was shorter and more explosive. "That pompous peacock tried to tell me to use margarine instead of butter in the brioche," he bellowed into the phone. "Margarine. I told him I would sooner cook with motor oil. When are we taking him down, Clara? Just give the word, and I'll walk, and I'll take the entire kitchen staff with me." "Not yet, Julian," I cautioned, a strategic calm settling over me. "A walkout is a single shot. We need a cannonade. Keep your team together. Cook the food his consultants demand. But make sure you remember my recipes. Your time to act will come." That evening, Evelyn Davenport came to my house. She swept in, a whirlwind of Chanel and determination, carrying a bottle of vintage champagne. "To the first move," she declared, popping the cork with a flourish. "And what is the first move?" I asked, feeling the buzz of the champagne and the thrill of the fight ahead. "It's simple, but elegant," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We starve him of his most precious resource, social currency." I've made a few calls. The Children's Hospital Charity Committee has decided, upon reflection, to issue a public thank you for the gala. But they will not be thanking Arthur's. They will be thanking by name CA Provisions and its founder Clara Ann for 2 decades of unparalleled culinary artistry and philanthropic partnership. I stared at her, astonished. "How?" "My dear," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, "I am the chair of that committee, and I simply reminded them where the real talent lies. The press release goes out tomorrow morning. It will be in every society column and news outlet. It's a subtle move, but a significant one. It introduces your name, your real company name, back into the conversation. It creates a question in people's minds. Who is Clara Ann, and why haven't we heard of her before? It's the first thread we pull to unravel his entire narrative." The next morning, I sat at my kitchen counter, a cup of coffee in hand, and opened the city's main newspaper website. And there it was. The headline was bigger than I had expected. Children's Hospital Gala Committee extends special thanks to culinary visionary Clara Ann. The article praised my behind-the-scenes genius and thanked CA Provisions for its long-standing support. Arthur's name was not mentioned once. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Arthur. His voice was no longer calm or authoritative. It was a high-pitched, frantic squawk. "What did you do?" he shrieked. "CA Provisions! What the hell is that? You're trying to sabotage me." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee before answering, my voice the epitome of innocent confusion. "Sabotage you, Arthur? I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm retired, remember? Focusing on my health. You should know you wrote the press release yourself. I could hear him sputtering, utterly flummoxed. He, the master of manipulation, was completely unprepared for me to use his own tactics against him. He had expected me to fade away quietly, a forgotten old woman. He had no contingency for a resurrected Clara Ann, backed by the city's most powerful woman. "This is not over, Clara," he snarled, all pretense of charm gone. "Oh, Arthur," I said, allowing a thin steel blade of a smile into my voice. "You're finally right about something. It's not over. It's just beginning." I hung up the phone, the satisfying click echoing in the quiet of my kitchen. I had been a ghost in my own company for years. Now, the haunting had officially begun. Arthur's retaliation was swift and clumsy. The day after the Children's Hospital press release, a feature appeared on a popular city blog known for its fawning coverage of the social scene. The title was, "The Graceful Exit. Arthur Helms Celebrates Mentor Clara Ann's Retirement." The piece was a masterclass in passive aggression, filled with quotes from Arthur praising my foundational work, while subtly painting me as a beloved but fragile relic. He described my, quote, decision to step back as a, quote, brave choice to prioritize well-being over the rigors of the modern event world. He even included a photo of us from 5 years prior, where I was laughing and he had his arm around my shoulder, the very picture of a supportive protégé. He was trying to reframe the narrative, to absorb my reemergence into his own story of magnanimity. Evelyn called me the moment the article went live. "Pathetic," she sniffed. "He's trying to put you in a gilded cage, my dear, the beloved founder resting on her laurels. Don't you dare rest." "I have no intention of it," I assured her, my eyes scanning the lines of text. "He's made a critical error. He thinks this battle is about public perception. He doesn't understand that the real war is fought in the pantry." For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in the machine of the city's culinary world. Guided by Maria's discreet text messages detailing Blake's latest cost-cutting outrages, I began to move. I didn't just call my old suppliers, I visited them. I went to the small, family-owned farm upstate that grew the jewel-like micro-arugula Arthur's was famous for. The owner, a grizzled man named Frank, met me by his fields. "Clara," he greeted me, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "That new bean counter of yours, Blake," he called last week, tried to get me to knock 30% off my price. Said he could get arugula from a corporate distributor in California for less. I told him he could get dirt from California for less too. "Frank," I said, "I'm starting a new private venture, very exclusive. I want all of your arugula, every last leaf, and I'll pay you 10% above your usual price." His eyes widened. "You got it, Clara. Consider your supply exclusive. That peacock Arthur can serve his guests iceberg lettuce for all I care." It was the same story everywhere I went. The artisanal cheesemaker whose Gruyere I'd featured for a decade, the fisherman who saved me the sweetest scallops from his morning catch, the Belgian chocolatier whose creations were the centerpiece of my dessert tables. Blake, in his arrogant quest for efficiency, had insulted them, haggled with them, and threatened to replace them. I, in turn, offered them loyalty, respect, and better terms. I wasn't just buying ingredients, I was reactivating a network built on years of mutual admiration and trust. I was methodically and silently redirecting the entire top tier of the city's food supply chain away from Arthur's and toward myself. The first sign that my strategy was working came from a frantic text from Maria. "Blake is losing his mind. The scallops for the mayor's fundraiser were rubbery, and the heirloom tomatoes were mushy. He's blaming Julian, but Julian just shrugged and said, 'I can only cook what you buy me.' Arthur is furious." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Arthur had stolen the brand, but I was stealing its very substance. He was left with a beautiful, hollow shell. EK. Our main target, however, remained the museum ball. Evelyn, in her capacity as the ball's co-chair, had a meeting with Arthur to go over the event contract. I sat in her drawing room as she took the call on speakerphone, a silent partner in the ambush. "Arthur, darling," Evelyn began, her voice dripping with honeyed authority. "We have a few small addenda to this year's contract. Given our theme, a night in the Imperial Garden, the committee insists on absolute authenticity." "Of course, Evelyn," Arthur gushed. "Authenticity is our middle name." "Wonderful," she purred. "Then you'll have no problem sourcing the specific heirloom dragon's breath radishes from the foothills of Mount Fuji for the amuse-bouche. And for the main course, the committee has its heart set on the saffron-crested Patagonian toothfish, which must be line-caught and no more than 2 days out of the water. Oh, and for the floral arrangements, we require the midnight serenity orchid, which, as you know, blooms for only 1 week a year." I listened as Arthur's confident tone slowly dissolved. I knew, because I had spent my life learning these things, that there was only one importer in the country who could get those radishes, a man I had personally sent a case of vintage Bordeaux to every Christmas for 10 years. The toothfish supplier was a notoriously prickly fisherman in Chile, who dealt only with a handful of trusted buyers, myself included. And the Midnight Serenity orchid? It was grown by a single, eccentric botanist in a private greenhouse in the Philippines, a man who communicated solely by handwritten letter. "Evelyn, that's remarkably specific," Arthur stammered, "and potentially difficult to source on such short notice." "Nonsense," Evelyn breezed. "A man of your capabilities will manage. It's all in the addendum. The contract is non-negotiable on these points. The reputation of the ball depends on it." After she hung up, she turned to me, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Checkmate, I believe?" "He'll try," I said. "He'll throw money at it. He'll fail, but he'll try." "Let him," Evelyn said. "Let him spend a fortune chasing ghosts. While he's doing that, we will be building." And so we did. While Arthur was desperately trying to navigate the impossible labyrinth I had set for him, I was quietly catering small, exquisite dinner parties for Evelyn's inner circle. I didn't have a company name or a website. I was simply Clara. The word spread like wildfire through the city's elite. Clara Ann, the secret genius behind Arthur's, was back, and her work was more brilliant than ever. To be cooked for by Clara became the ultimate status symbol. I was creating something Arthur could never buy. Genuine, word-of-mouth mystique. The final piece of the plan fell into place a month before the ball. My lawyer, Samuel Pike, served Arthur with the first official notice. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a simple, brutal cease and desist letter. It informed him that as the owner of the intellectual property, specifically the proprietary recipes developed under CA Provisions LLC, I was revoking his right to use any of my signature dishes. The lemon tart, the truffle risotto, the passion fruit soufflé. The entire foundation of the Arthur's menu was now legally off limits. He was contractually obligated to cater the most important event of the year, a ball themed around exquisite and rare ingredients he couldn't source, and he was now legally forbidden from cooking the very food that had made his reputation. He was a king trapped in his castle, watching his kingdom turn to sand. The stage for the museum ball was no longer just set. It was a perfectly constructed trap, and Arthur was walking right into it. The cease and desist letter sent Arthur into a spiral of impotent fury. Maria described the scene to me in a hushed phone call from the women's restroom, the only place she was certain Blake hadn't installed some sort of listening device. Arthur had apparently stormed through the main kitchen, waving the letter, his face a mottled shade of crimson. He accused Julian of conspiracy, of feeding me trade secrets. Julian, polishing a copper pot with deliberate calm, had simply looked up and said, "They are not trade secrets, Mr. Helms. They are Clara's recipes. I am a chef, not a thief. You forbade me from contacting her, so I have respected that. Perhaps you should have read your own contracts more closely." The simple, irrefutable logic of it left Arthur speechless. He had built his kingdom on my intellectual property, and he had been so busy polishing the crown that he never bothered to check the foundations. Stripped of my signature dishes, he was just a man with a nice suit and an empty menu. His desperation took on a manic quality. He and Blake hired a team of culinary consultants, slick, overpaid chefs from restaurant groups who specialized in reverse engineering popular dishes. They spent days locked in the main tasting room, trying to replicate my lemon tart. According to Maria, the results were disastrous. One version was too gelatinous. Another tasted faintly of chemical cleaner. And a third attempt resulted in a small oven fire that set off the sprinklers and flooded the pastry kitchen. Arthur was trying to mass-produce magic, and the universe was refusing to cooperate. Meanwhile, his quest for the imperial garden ingredients became the stuff of high comedy. He threw astronomical sums of money around, trying to bypass the relationships I had nurtured for decades. He sent a junior event planner to the upstate farm to try and bribe Frank, my arugula grower. Frank, a man of simple principles, apparently listened to the offer, spat on the ground, and said, "My arugula ain't for sale to weasels," before going back to his tractor. He managed to find a black market seafood broker in Miami, who promised the Patagonian toothfish. A private jet was chartered. The fish arrived on a bed of ice, and Julian, forced to inspect it, declared it 3 weeks old, unfit for consumption, and smelling faintly of despair and bad decisions. Arthur, refusing to admit defeat, ordered them to cook it anyway for a private tasting. Blake, I was told, spent the rest of the afternoon in his private bathroom, violently ill. The saga of the Midnight Serenity orchid was the most pathetic. Arthur, unable to contact the Filipino botanist, hired a private investigator to find him. The investigator, after a week, reported back that the botanist was on a silent meditation retreat in the mountains and had left a simple note on his greenhouse door. "Disturb my orchids and face the wrath of the spirits." While Arthur was fighting a multi-front war against my legacy, I was in a state of creative bliss. Working from my own kitchen with Evelyn's blank check and limitless connections, I began to design the true menu for the museum ball. I wasn't just cooking, I was composing. I flew to the Philippines myself. I didn't need an investigator. I had the botanist's personal address from years of sending him handwritten Christmas cards. I found him not in a silent retreat, but tending to his magnificent, otherworldly flowers. We sat for hours, drinking jasmine tea, and he spoke of the orchids as his children. When I told him my story, he smiled gently and promised me that for the ball, his children would bloom as they never had before. My days were a whirlwind of focused, joyful work. I rehired several of my old, trusted sous chefs who had quit in disgust after my departure. We worked out of a state-of-the-art temporary kitchen I'd had installed in the ballroom of a vacant mansion Evelyn owned downtown. The space was filled with the scent of simmering stocks, fresh herbs, and melting chocolate. There was no pressure, no corner cutting, just the pure, unadulterated pleasure of creation. We were a secret elite team preparing for the culinary coup of the century. 2 weeks before the ball, Evelyn played her next card. She called an emergency meeting of the museum ball committee. Arthur was summoned. He arrived looking haggard, his suit seeming to hang off his frame, dark circles under his eyes. "Arthur," Evelyn said, her tone grave, "we have a serious problem. My sources tell me there is chaos in your kitchens, that your suppliers are failing you and your new menu is untested. The ball is the museum's single largest fundraiser. We cannot afford a disaster." "There is no problem, Evelyn," Arthur insisted, his voice cracking slightly. "We have everything under control. The menu is innovative, daring." "Is it?" she countered. "Because my sources also tell me you tried to serve 3-week-old fish to your own staff." "This is not about innovation, Arthur. This is about competence. The committee has had a vote. We are exercising the, quote, quality assurance clause in your contract." Arthur looked blank. "The what?" "Clause 17, subsection B," Evelyn said, tapping the document in front of her. "It stipulates that the committee can, at its discretion, bring in an independent culinary consultant to oversee and, if necessary, supplement the chosen caterer's menu to ensure the event meets the museum's standards of excellence. It's a standard clause. I'm sure you read it." He clearly hadn't. He looked at her, trapped. "And who?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this consultant?" Evelyn smiled, a slow, magnificent, world-ending smile. "Why, Clara Ann, of course. She has graciously agreed to step in and assist you in ensuring the ball is a success. She will be bringing her own staff and her own ingredients. She will have full authority over the final menu served." The color drained from Arthur's face. He was staring at the architect of his doom. He had been so focused on the public-facing battle that he never saw the logistical trap closing around him. He was still the caterer of record, his company's name on every invitation. He would be forced to stand in the magnificent museum ballroom, surrounded by the city's most powerful people, and watch as I, the woman he had fired and declared senile, served a menu of breathtaking brilliance under his own banner. He would be a guest at his own execution. The humiliation would be absolute, a story that would be told at dinner parties for years to come. The ghost he thought he'd exorcised was about to become the main attraction. The day of the museum ball dawned bright and clear. For Arthur, it must have felt like the world was mocking him with its beauty. For me, it was a day of quiet, focused energy. Our operation moved with the precision of a military campaign. 2 enormous, gleaming mobile kitchens, Evelyn had them flown in from Germany, were parked in the museum's service bay, connected by a climate-controlled walkway. Inside, my hand-picked team, clad in crisp, black chef's coats embroidered with a simple, elegant CA, worked in a state of harmonious flow. The air was thick with the scent of roasting quail, simmering saffron broth, and the delicate perfume of the midnight serenity orchids, which had arrived that morning in custom-built humidified crates, their deep violet petals just beginning to unfurl. Arthur's team was relegated to the museum's existing, smaller kitchen. They were tasked with preparing the cocktail hour canapés, the few, simple items I had magnanimously left to their purview. From the reports I received from Maria, who was acting as my official liaison, the atmosphere was a toxic blend of panic and apathy. Blake was barking contradictory orders, Arthur was chain-drinking espressos and staring blankly at the wall, and the demoralized staff were moving with the enthusiasm of pallbearers. Around noon, Arthur made his last, desperate play. He appeared at the entrance to my mobile kitchen, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Clara," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper, "you can't do this." I didn't stop my work. I was carefully placing a micro cilantro leaf onto a platter of raw, glistening toothfish crudo, each slice arranged to look like the petal of a lotus flower. "Can't do what, Arthur?" I asked without looking up. "My job? The job the museum committee has contracted me to do to ensure their event isn't a catastrophic failure? This is my event," he hissed, taking a step inside. 2 of my sous chefs, both large, imposing men I had mentored for years, instinctively moved to flank the doorway. "My company's name is on everything." "Yes, it is," I said, finally turning to face him. I held his gaze. The frantic, cornered energy coming off him was palpable. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, it was almost pitiful. He was no longer the charming predator, but a desperate man pleading with the executioner. "And you will be compensated as per your original contract, but the execution, the art, the very soul of the evening, that belongs to me. It always has." "What do you want?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Money? Do you want more money? I can renegotiate the buyout." "This was never about money, Arthur," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "You should know that. You worked beside me for 15 years. This is about respect. It's about the lie you told when you said I was losing it. It's about the chip on my favorite knife. It's about trying to serve 3-week-old fish to the mayor. It's about the fact that you thought my life's work was something you could simply take. Like a coat you check at the door." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was finally, truly seeing me, not as his aging, forgettable mentor, but as the architect of his rise and the engineer of his fall. Evelyn chose that moment to make her grand entrance. She swept into the kitchen, radiating power and purpose. She completely ignored Arthur, as if he were a piece of furniture. "Clara, my dear," she boomed. "Everything is magnificent. I just saw the imperial table settings. Breathtaking." She turned to Arthur then, her eyes flicking over him with icy disdain. "Arthur, you look dreadful. You should go get changed. The guests will be arriving in a few hours, and as the host, you simply must look the part." The command, disguised as a suggestion, was the final, crushing blow. He was being dismissed from my kitchen, from the heart of the operation, and sent away to put on his costume. He turned without another word and shuffled away, a man hollowed out from the inside. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the museum's marble floors, the two kitchens presented a stark tableau. In his, chaos and cheap champagne for the nervous staff. In mine, calm focus, quiet confidence, and the scent of victory. Julian was plating the first course, his hands moving with the grace of a concert pianist. Maria was running through the final service choreography with the waitstaff, all of whom were handpicked for their loyalty and professionalism. I took a moment to stand alone at the kitchen's exit, looking out into the grand, empty ballroom. The tables were set with imperial silks, the centerpieces overflowing with my impossible-to-get orchids, the crystal glassware gleaming under the soft lights. It was perfect. A battleground disguised as a fairy tale. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Samuel Pike, my lawyer. The final papers are ready to be filed at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The board is dissolved. The bank accounts are frozen. The DBA Arthurs will be officially terminated. You will have your company back, under your name. The kingdom is yours, Your Majesty. The first guests were arriving, their laughter and chatter echoing from the main entrance. Evelyn caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle, triumphant nod. It was time. The performance was about to begin. Arthur, standing pale and rigid near the entrance, was forced to smile and greet the very people who would bear witness to his spectacular, meticulously planned downfall. He was a ghost at his own feast, and the main course was revenge. The cocktail hour was Arthur's last stand, and it was a pathetic one. The canapés his team produced were technically proficient, but utterly soulless. Perfectly uniform mini quiches, bland chicken salad in soggy pastry cups, and shrimp cocktails that tasted of little more than cold water. It was competent, corporate catering, the kind of food you forget the moment you swallow it. I watched from a discreet balcony overlooking the grand hall as Arthur moved through the crowd, a rictus grin plastered on his face, accepting polite, lukewarm compliments. The city's elite were masters of faint praise. "How reliable, Arthur," one noted philanthropist commented, examining a pale-looking mushroom volume au vent. Arthur's smile tightened. "Liability." He saw me then, standing on the balcony beside Evelyn Davenport. I was not in a chef's coat. I was wearing a simple, elegant evening gown of deep sapphire silk, a string of my grandmother's, pearls at my throat. I was not the help, I was a distinguished guest. The look on his face, a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred, was more satisfying than any dish I had ever created. When the chimes rang, signaling the move into the main ballroom for dinner, the real performance began. The energy in the room shifted. The moment the guests saw the tables, a collective gasp went through the hall. The midnight serenity orchids, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, seemed to thrum with a life of their own, their violet petals impossibly deep, their scent subtle and intoxicating. Then came the first course. It was my Patagonian toothfish crudo, served on a chilled slab of Himalayan salt, adorned with the fiery dragon's breath radishes and glistening pearls of yuzu-infused oil. It was not just food. It was art. It was a statement. The murmurs started almost immediately. At the head table, the mayor's wife, who had so readily accepted Arthur's lies about me, took one bite and her eyes widened. "My goodness!" she exclaimed, turning to Evelyn. "This is celestial. Arthur has truly outdone himself." Evelyn smiled her serene leonine smile. "Oh, Arthur didn't make this, darling. None of it. Isn't it obvious?" The mayor's wife looked confused, glancing from the exquisite dish in front of her to the memory of the limp canapés she'd had moments before. The discrepancy was too vast to ignore. "Arthur's team handled the cocktail hour," Evelyn explained, her voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "But there were some concerns about quality for the main event. The museum committee brought in a specialist to oversee the dinner. The true talent behind the evening." She gestured with her chin toward me, where I sat at the adjacent table. "Clara Ann." The name rippled through the top tables like a shockwave. Heads turned. eyes widened with dawning comprehension. The banking tycoon from the opening scenes stared at me, then at his plate, then back at me. The pity on his face from that first night replaced by a look of profound respect and dawning horror at his own gullibility. He had been played, and he knew it. Each course built upon the last, a crescendo of flavor and artistry. The saffron-crusted toothfish was followed by a consommé, so clear and deeply flavored, it tasted like the very essence of the earth. Then came the roasted quail, stuffed with foie gras and wild mushrooms, resting on a bed of truffle-infused polenta. With every plate that was cleared, my legend grew, and Arthur's shrank. Now, he was forced to endure it all. He wandered between tables, his smile now a ghastly skeletal grin. Guests would stop him, raving about the quail, and he would have to nod and say, "Thank you," accepting praise for a masterpiece he had no part in. He was a living fraud, and with every compliment, the lie became more transparent. He was the host of a party that was celebrating his own irrelevance. The final act was the dessert. I had designed it to be the ultimate showstopper. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A single spotlight hit the main entrance. A procession of waiters emerged, each carrying a single, perfect sugar sphere, spun so thinly it was translucent. Inside, nestled on a bed of pistachio sponge, was a single, perfect raspberry sorbet, surrounded by a cloud of rose water-infused vapor that swirled within the globe. At the table, a waiter would gently tap the sphere with a tiny silver hammer, causing it to shatter and release the fragrant smoke. It was theater. It was magic. It was a final, undeniable testament to who I was and what I could do. The ballroom erupted in spontaneous applause. It was an ovation not just for the dessert, but for the entire experience. It was a recognition of true artistry. At the height of the applause, the museum director took the stage. He thanked the guests, the donors, and the committee. Then he said, "And we must extend a very special thank you to the official caterer for the evening, Arthur's." He paused, and I saw Arthur straighten up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. "For their cooperation," the director continued, "in facilitating the incredible work of our guest culinary consultant, the true artist behind tonight's magnificent feast, the legendary Clara Ann." The spotlight swung from the stage and landed squarely on me. The applause redoubled, thunderous and sustained. I rose slowly, gracefully, and gave a small, humble bow. Across the room, I met Arthur's eyes. They were empty. Defeated. He was a hollow man in a beautiful room, a ghost at a feast he had not prepared, being applauded for a success that was entirely, unequivocally, mine. The humiliation was total. It was public. And it was complete. As the applause subsided, and I retook my seat, the dynamic of the room had been permanently altered. I was no longer a background player. I was the center of gravity. People didn't walk to Arthur anymore. They navigated around him to get to my table. The banking tycoon, Mr. Hamilton, approached first, his face a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. "Miss Anne," he said, his voice low and sincere. "That was not just a meal. It was an experience. I feel I owe you an apology. I was led to believe... Well, it's clear I was misled. Your talent is singular." "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton," I replied graciously, offering no quarter for his guilt. "I'm just glad you enjoyed the evening." My forgiveness was not his to have. My success was my own. Next came the mayor's wife. She fluttered to my side, her hand on her heart. "Clara, my dear, I feel like such a fool. The stories that man told, you must think me terribly naive." "I think," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "that we often see what people want us to see. Now we are all seeing the truth." The rest of the evening passed in a similar vein. A parade of the city's most influential figures came to my table, paying their respects, forging new connections, and pointedly ignoring the man whose name was on the banners. Arthur had become invisible. I saw him slip out through a side exit long before the final guests departed, not with a bang, but with the silent, pathetic fizzle of a faulty firework. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. His own party had become a celebration of his obsolescence. Clara was etahiamin. The next morning, my phone began ringing at 7 a.m. and did not stop. It was event planners, corporate heads, and wealthy hosts, all clamoring to book me for their next soiree. The story of the museum ball had already become a legend overnight, a tale of intrigue and culinary genius that had captivated the city. By 8:30 a.m., I had offers for the next 6 months of holidays, galas, and exclusive dinner parties. At precisely 9 a.m., Samuel Pike filed the paperwork. In a series of swift, electronic actions, the world shifted beneath Arthur's feet. The advisory board he created was legally dissolved. The bank accounts of Arthur's were frozen, pending a full audit and transfer of control to the majority shareholder, me, and the DBA Arthur's was officially terminated. The brand he had so carefully cultivated ceased to exist. He wasn't just fired, he was legally and financially vaporized. At 10 a.m., I drove to my old headquarters, the beautiful downtown studio I had designed and built. I used my original master key to open the front door. The reception area was quiet. A young woman I didn't recognize sat at the desk. She looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, walking past her. "You can start by packing your things." I walked into the main office and found Blake, the cost-cutting consultant, yelling into his phone. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen? Try the card again." He saw me and his face went white. "You can't be here," he stammered. I placed my handbag down on the large oak desk that had once been mine. "This is the headquarters of CA Provisions, a private company. You are trespassing. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises before I call security." He stared at me, his bravado crumbling into fear. He knew he had no power here. He scurried away like the rat he was, grabbing his laptop and a hideous motivational poster from his wall before practically running out the door. I walked through the building, my building. The silence was profound. In the main kitchen, a handful of the junior staff Arthur had kept on stood around, looking lost and confused. They tensed when they saw me. I called them together. "My name is Clara Ann," I said, my voice echoing in the large space. "I am the founder and owner of this company. As of this morning, the brand known as Arthur's no longer exists. Mr. Helms and his associates are no longer affiliated with this organization in any capacity." I looked at their young, anxious faces. They were not my enemies. They were just employees caught in the crossfire. "I know that the last few months here have been chaotic and unpleasant," I continued. "I am offering each of you a choice. You can leave today with a generous severance package and a letter of recommendation from me. Or you can stay. If you stay, you will work harder than you have ever worked before. You will be held to the highest standards of excellence. You will learn what it truly means to be part of a team dedicated to artistry, not just profit. But you will be respected, you will be valued, and you will be part of building something truly special. The choice is yours. I'll be in my office." I turned and walked to my old studio, the heart of the building. The boxes Arthur had sent me were still piled in the corner of my living room at home. Here, the space was clinical and sterile, stripped of my personality. Arthur had removed all my books, my sketches, my plants. But he couldn't remove the spirit of the place. The light still streamed through the large windows just as I had designed. But I stood in the center of the room, inhaling the familiar scent of potential. The war was over. The victory was absolute. But this was not the end. This was the beginning of the reconstruction. I was not just reclaiming what was mine. I was building it anew, under my own name and on my own uncompromising terms. The Queen was home, and the kingdom was finally, truly hers. The hours that followed my return were a quiet whirlwind of activity. Of the 12 junior staff members Arthur had left behind, 7 chose to take the severance package. They were polite, but their eyes held the unmistakable look of people who had been conditioned by Blake and Arthur to value a steady paycheck over a passion project. I wished them well, genuinely. A kitchen built on fear and obligation is a kitchen that produces lifeless food. The 5 who remained were timid at first, but I saw a spark in them. It was the pastry assistant who had watched in horror as her kitchen was flooded by Arthur's failed tart experiment, the young butcher who had winced every time Blake ordered a lower grade of meat, 2 line cooks who had started under me years ago and had weathered the storm, and the young receptionist I had spoken to on my way in, who returned to my office an hour later and said, "I don't know how to cook, Ms. Anne, but I know quality when I see it, and I want to work for a company that does too." This was my new nucleus. I promoted the receptionist on the spot to be my personal assistant. That afternoon, I called my true lieutenants home. Julian arrived first, striding into the kitchen as if he'd never left, a wide grin on his face. He ran a hand over the cold stainless steel countertops. "It feels right again," he said. Maria came next, her posture no longer hunched with anxiety but upright with purpose. She held a clipboard that was already filled with notes. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she announced. "The Historical Society wants to book us for their centennial. The opera wants us for their opening night. And Evelyn Davenport called. She says she's planning a small welcome-back party for you, at her home, for 200 of her closest friends, next month." I laughed. A full, genuine laugh that echoed in the empty studio. Of course she did. This was Evelyn's way of cementing my return, of holding a public coronation disguised as an intimate party. It would be our first official event. "We need a name," Julian said, looking around. "CA Provisions sounds like a shipping company." "And Arthur's is a name I never want to hear again," Maria added firmly. I walked over to the large window overlooking the city, the skyline I knew so well. For years I had hidden behind a name that wasn't mine, believing my work would speak for itself. It had, but it had spoken for the wrong person. It was time to claim not just the work, but the identity behind it. "We'll call it Clara," I said simply. "Just that. No provisions, no catering. Just my name. Let the work we do define what that name means." A sense of profound rightness settled over the room. Julian and Maria nodded in unison. "Clara," Maria repeated, testing the sound. "I like it." The following weeks were a joyful blur of rebuilding. We didn't just clean the studio, we reconsecrated it. My books, sketches, and plants returned from their boxed exile. We installed a small library of culinary history in the break room. We commissioned a local artist to paint a mural on the main kitchen wall, a vibrant, abstract collage of herbs, spices, and flowers. We brought back Tasting Tuesdays, a tradition Arthur had scrapped, where the entire staff, from dishwashers to managers, would sample and critique new dishes. The soul of the company was returning, not because I commanded it, but because I created the space for it to flourish. The final ghost of the old regime was exorcised by a small piece of gossip Maria shared one afternoon. "You'll never guess who I saw this morning," she said, pouring me a cup of tea. "Blake. He was interviewing for a job as a manager at a chain steakhouse in a suburban mall. The image was so perfectly pathetic that I couldn't help but smile. As for Arthur, he vanished. His assets were tied up in legal proceedings from which he would emerge with only his original 10% stake, now in a company whose value was being rebuilt from the ashes he'd made. His reputation in the city was shattered. No one would hire him, no one would fund him. The last I heard, he had sold his downtown condo at a loss and moved back to his hometown, a cautionary tale whispered at the very dinner parties he once headlined. He wasn't a monster. He was just a hollow man, and when the artifice was stripped away, there was nothing left. For Evelyn's welcome-back party, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I didn't create a complex, avant-garde menu. Instead, I crafted a menu of perfect simplicity, a tribute to my own history. There was the lemon tart that started it all, its flavor bright and true. There was the slow braised short rib my late husband had loved, a dish that tasted of home and memory. There was bread, baked in-house, served warm with freshly churned butter. It was food that nourished, that comforted, that told a story. My story. The night of the party. As I watched Evelyn's powerful guests, savoring every bite, I felt a sense of peace that went beyond victory. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving Arthur wrong. It was about proving myself right. Right to believe in quality. Right to value loyalty. Right to finally, after all these years, step out from behind the curtain and take a bow under a banner that bore my own name. The applause, when it came, felt different this time. It wasn't the roar of a battlefield. It was the warm, sustained welcome of a homecoming. A year passed. The name, Clara, became synonymous not just with luxury, but with integrity. We were the most sought-after event company in the city, not only because the food was sublime and the service impeccable, but because there was a story behind it, a story people loved to tell. The tale of the brilliant woman who was cast out and returned to reclaim her kingdom resonated in a city that admired both artistry and resilience. We were more than a catering company. We had become a brand that stood for something. The studio was a place of vibrant, creative energy. I made it a point to know everyone's name, to listen to their ideas. Young chefs who, under Arthur, would have been relegated to peeling vegetables for years were now encouraged to experiment, to present their own dishes at our Tuesday tastings. Julian, once a temperamental artist fighting for his standards, was now a nurturing, if still exacting, mentor to a new generation. Maria ran the operational side of the business with a calm authority and an almost psychic ability to anticipate problems before they arose. We weren't just a team. We were a community built on a foundation of shared respect. One afternoon, I was reviewing applications for our new apprenticeship program. I came across one from a young woman whose cover letter was so full of fiery passion for sustainable sourcing and culinary innovation that it reminded me of myself at 25. In her portfolio were sketches of dishes, not just recipes. She thought in pictures, in compositions, just as I did. I saw in her the same spark, the same desire to create, the same tendency to focus on the work above all else. And in that moment, I also saw the potential for the same vulnerability. I called her in for an interview. She was brilliant, nervous, and utterly focused on her craft. At the end of our conversation, after I had offered her the apprenticeship, I gave her a piece of advice. "Your talent is immense," I told her. "It will be the engine of your success. But never, ever believe that your talent alone is enough. Do not hide in the kitchen. Do not let others speak for you. Learn to present your own work, to explain your own vision. Sign your name, figuratively and literally, to everything you create. Your work deserves a voice, and that voice must be your own." She looked at me, a little confused but nodded. She would understand one day. My journey hadn't just been about reclaiming a company. It had been about reclaiming my own voice. For years, I had operated under the flawed assumption that true genius was humble, that my work was a separate entity from myself, and that its quality would be its own reward. I believed that business and art were separate spheres, and I was content to master one while leaving the other to Arthur. I was wrong. Arthur taught me a painful but invaluable lesson. In the world he operated in, any work left unsigned is considered an open invitation for forgery. Any voice that remains silent will eventually be spoken over. He didn't just steal my recipes. He tried to steal my narrative because I had left it unattended. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the fight to reclaim what was mine, it forged me into a different kind of leader. I was no longer just a creator. The woman who hid behind a floral column was gone forever. I had learned that true leadership isn't about having the best ideas. It's about creating a culture where the best ideas can thrive and be properly credited. It's about protecting your people, defending your standards, and having the courage to attach your name and your face to your life's work. It's about understanding that the menu is meaningless without the integrity of the chef who wrote it. Last week, a writer from a national food magazine came to the studio for a feature story. "It's an incredible comeback story," she said as we sat in my sunlit office. "It's not a comeback," I corrected her gently. I was never gone. The work was always there, the quality was always there. The only thing that has changed is the name on the door. I looked around my office, at the happy, focused hum of activity in the kitchen beyond the glass wall. I saw the young apprentice, my new mentee, showing a sketch to Julian, her face alight with excitement as he nodded in approval. This was the ecosystem I had built. This was the victory. It wasn't the empty look in Arthur's eyes at the museum ball. It was this: a thriving, respectful, brilliant place where talent was nurtured, not exploited. A place where everyone was encouraged to sign their name to their work. A place built not just on good food, but on good faith. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was a legacy no one could ever take from me again. Tonight, we catered the opening of the new wing at the city's Museum of Modern Art. It was an architectural marvel of glass and light, and the event was the most anticipated of the season. From a discreet balcony, my favorite vantage point, though now for entirely different reasons, I watched the evening unfold. Below me, my team moved with a silent, graceful choreography that was a work of art in itself. Every plate that emerged from the kitchen was a testament to our shared vision. Every guest's smile of delight was a dividend on an investment of integrity. I saw Julian in the corner, explaining the flavor profile of a complex dish to a captivated guest, his passion for the food evident in his every gesture. I saw Maria, speaking quietly into her headset, orchestrating the complex logistics of the evening with an effortless calm that belied the immense difficulty of her work. I saw the young apprentice I had hired, her face glowing with pride as she presented a tray of her own creation, a delicate confection of crystallized hibiscus that we had developed together. She caught my eye and beamed, a look of pure, unadulterated joy and gratitude. That single look was worth more to me than the thunderous applause at the museum ball. Looking down at the scene, I finally understood the true nature of what had happened with Arthur. His betrayal was not a random act of malice. It was a vacuum created by my own absence. I had been so intensely focused on the what, the food, the design, the logistics, that I had completely neglected the who. I had treated my own identity as an unimportant ingredient, something that could be substituted or left out. Arthur simply filled the space I had willingly left empty. He was a parasite, yes, but one that could only thrive in the shadows I myself had cast. He didn't steal my power, I abdicated it, and he merely walked over and picked it up. The world is full of Arthurs. They are the charismatic speakers who present the work of the quiet researchers. They are the charming bosses who take credit for their team's late nights. They thrive on the humility of true creators, mistaking a lack of self-promotion for a lack of ownership. They bank on the idea that good work is its own reward, and that talented people will be content to remain invisible as long as they are allowed to create. If there is one thing I hope my story can teach, it is this: do not make the same mistake I did. Do not wait for a crisis to force you to claim your own narrative. Your work and your identity are inextricably linked. To allow someone else to represent your work is to allow them to slowly, imperceptibly replace you. Document everything. Build alliances not just with those who admire your work, but with those who respect your character. And most importantly, learn to speak of your own accomplishments with the same passion with which you create them. It is not arrogance, it is stewardship of your own talent. My greatest creation is not a dish or a menu. It is this company, Clara. It is a place where credit is given freely, where every contribution is seen and valued, and where the name on the door represents not just a single person, but a collective commitment to excellence and integrity. The fight I endured was not one I would wish on anyone, but I would not trade the wisdom it gave me for anything. It burned away my naivete and left behind a core of unshakable strength. It taught me that the most important thing you can build isn't just a business, but a legacy. And a legacy cannot be left in the hands of others. It must be held, shaped, and defended with all the passion and fire you possess. My name is Clara Ann. I am a chef, a leader, and the founder of my own success. And my story, I have decided, is only just beginning. Dallas. The James Beard Awards, the Oscars of the culinary world, were being held in Chicago. The grand ballroom buzzed with the energy of the nation's greatest chefs. At a table near the front sat Clara Ann, now 72. Her hair was a brilliant silver, and her eyes, framed by the fine lines of a life fully lived, missed nothing. She was not a nominee tonight, she was something more, She was an icon, attending as the mentor to the evening's brightest star. On stage, a young woman clutched the award for Rising Star Chef of the Year. It was Isabel, the fiery apprentice Clara had hired a decade ago. Now the head of Clara's innovative, new experimental division, Isabel had taken the industry by storm. "There are so many people to thank," Isabel said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My incredible team, our amazing suppliers, but most of all, I have to thank my mentor, Clara Ann." The camera found Clara at her table. She gave a small, proud nod. "Clara taught me how to cook, how to taste, and how to create," Isabel continued, her voice growing stronger. "But the most important lesson she ever taught me had nothing to do with food. On my first day, she told me, 'Sign your name to everything you create. Your work deserves a voice, and that voice must be your own.' She taught me that being a chef isn't just about hiding in the kitchen and hoping your work speaks for you. It's about having the courage to stand beside it. This award is not just for me. It's for the culture of ownership and integrity she built." Beside Clara, Maria, now the company's COO, squeezed her hand. Julian, whose official title was Chief Culinary Officer, but whom everyone still called Chef, raised his champagne glass in a silent toast. They had transformed Clara from a successful company into a celebrated institution, a place known for producing the next generation of conscientious culinary leaders. Later that evening, at the after-party, Clara stood on a balcony, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. Isabel came to join her, holding her heavy award. "I meant every word, Clara," she said softly. "I know you did," Clara replied, her voice warm, "and you have earned every bit of this." She looked at the young woman beside her, confident, brilliant, and fully in command of her own narrative. This, Clara knew, was the true measure of her success. It was not the memory of Arthur's defeat or the company's immense profits. It was this moment. It was seeing the spark she had nurtured become a brilliant flame. Her legacy wasn't just in the company she had reclaimed, it was in the leaders she had inspired. She had not just taken back her kingdom, she had taught a new generation how to build their own. And as the city lights twinkled below, she felt a profound and lasting peace, the quiet satisfaction of a masterpiece finally, and truly complete.